Hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to our garden, where today I'll show you how to use less seeds when planting your carrots, how to get better germination, and how to get the timing right for a good fall to winter harvest. First, we'll talk about timing in order to have a good fall to winter harvest of carrots, if that's your goal. The thing that we really have to make sure of is that the carrots are going to be mature by the time the really cold weather and really short days happen. That's because the carrots will stop growing by that time, and then they're going to be in the ground all winter long. Essentially, they're not going to rot, but they go dormant. So they're going to be dormant for the winter time, and then they'll resume growth when it starts to get warmer in the very early spring. Here, it's for us, it's February. We're in zone 7B in upstate South Carolina. And when that happens, the carrots, when they put on new growth in the spring, that's when the texture really changes. They become really tough, and there's like a really tough core in the middle of them. And then they'll end up bolting, and they're really not as good to eat then. But if you want to pull really perfect carrots out of the ground by like late November and even throughout the winter, the goal is to time the planting so that they're mature by, say, your first frost date. For us, that's early November. I'm going to be planting these Danvers 126 carrots today. The days to maturity, we're counting 70 days, so it's September 1st. Usually I like to have my carrots planted by mid-August, but I did not get out here to do that for lots of different reasons, including weather. It was over 100 degrees last week, so that didn't happen. But anyways, 70 days will put us right around our first frost date. And carrots, if you leave them in the ground during the cold weather and they experience frosts and freezes, their flavor actually improves. So once the carrots are mature by that time, you can leave them in the winter for the whole entire winter and pull them out as needed, and the flavor is absolutely amazing. One thing to note, though, is that if your ground freezes over the winter time, the challenge is going to be harvesting the carrots, obviously, while the ground is frozen. So maybe if you have a way to mulch them really heavily so that your garden bed doesn't freeze, then they might be easily harvested that way. We had some really, really cold weather. Our ground doesn't usually freeze here, but the soil in our raised beds froze last year in December because we had like really cold weather for us in the single digits, and it froze. It was hard to pull the carrots out. So yeah, you just want to make sure that either you have a protected area or so that you can harvest your carrots easier in the winter time, or time your harvests around when the ground freezes. And then if you live in a more southern, warmer climate, obviously you know when you can grow carrots, you can easily grow carrots throughout the winter. Here are a few quick carrot growing tips before we start planting these seeds. The first one is you want to make sure that your soil is loose and well drained, because if the soil is too compact, what happens is the carrots are going to have a hard time developing and the growth will be stunted. So before we plant anything in our garden, we add a couple of inches of compost to the top of the soil, and then we very lightly work it in to the first inch or two so we don't disturb the soil too much. And that helps feed the soil and also helps the soil retain moisture, and you can see that it's far from compact, so the carrots are going to grow well. And if you are going to fertilize, I would suggest getting a soil test done. It never hurts having a soil test because it's always good to know what you're working with and if you have any nutrient deficiencies. Carrots need lower nitrogen, but higher potassium and phosphate to help the roots develop really well. So if you're going to use a fertilizer, make sure it's low in nitrogen and high in potassium and phosphate. The next growing tip is making sure you don't have any stones or rocks in your soil, because they might impede the growth of the carrots. So just removing them is a good idea, even if they're really small ones. Providing consistent moisture is also important. You don't want your soil to be too... Oh, look, it's a little bumblebee. Hopefully it's not going to sting me, but there it is.
That's weird.
Yeah, it's going to hurt if it stings me. Anyways, Providing consistent moisture for your carrots is important. You don't want your soil to be soggy, but you don't want it to be too dry either, and that will help your carrots grow nice and consistently. Mulching also helps. It helps your soil retain moisture. It helps keep out weeds because you don't want your carrots competing with weeds for nutrients and space in your beds. Here's what happened to us last year, and this was actually a good experiment. I ended up planting the carrots mid-September to late September. I planted one bed of them then, and I planted 2 other beds in mid-August. And there was a huge difference. And I made a video about this that I can link in this video if you'd like to watch it more in detail. Anyways, the ones that we planted late did not have time to mature by the time winter came, and they put on a lot of their growth in February into spring. So we harvested them and they weren't nearly as good. The other thing that happened last fall was we had a really, really early freeze, like a hard freeze. It got down into the mid-20s in October, which is really not common for our growing zone here in upstate South Carolina. So that kind of messed things up, and maybe those carrots would have been better if we had a later frost, but still, mid-August, beginning of September, this is the very latest time here in our growing zone that I would ever recommend planting carrots unless you have an earlier variety that matures earlier than 70 days. Okay, I've figured this out through trial and error over the years. The easiest way to plant carrot seeds that also saves a bunch of seeds. Before, I used to just broadcast the seeds in the rows, you know, not paying attention exactly where I was putting them or how many seeds I was using. Now I'm more meticulous about it, which takes a little bit of more time up front when you're planting the seeds, but it saves so much time in the future as far as thinning goes, and it saves so many seeds. And I'll show you how I do this in just a minute, but I just basically use a few seeds. I put a few seeds down at a time every few inches, and then when I thin, I'm only thinning out 2, maybe maximum 3 carrots in each little spot where I put the seeds. And I also wait till the carrots get a little bit bigger to thin, and that way we can feed them to our chickens or eat little baby carrots in our salads. But they're so easy to thin that way. Thinning carrots was my absolute least favorite thing to do in the garden, and I was terrible at thinning because I just didn't like to do it. It was so tedious, so I never had really good carrot harvest that way. But when you plant less seeds and you plant them more meticulously, you end up with better carrots, even though you might think you might get less carrots because you're planting less. But I usually plant 4 rows in a 4x8 raised bed and plant the seeds every few inches. And then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with these boards too. Those help you line up the carrots when you're initially planting them. And then they have so many other benefits, which I'll show you in just a minute. Okay, so 4 rows of carrots done, and that hardly took any time, maybe a half an hour, and we were a little bit more meticulous about how we planted them, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. And I'll tell you, these boards, they will give you near 100% germination. They drastically increase germination, no matter what growing zone you're in, and whether you're planting them in the fall or the spring. And here's why. They hold the moisture in. Carrots have to be planted really shallow. I think there's like 1/4 of an inch max of soil on top of them. That means that the soil dries out really quickly. Whether it's hot, cool, no matter what, the sun is going to shine on the soil and the moisture evaporates really fast. So the boards help hold the moisture, help the soil hold the moisture. And when you water, you can water right on top of the boards, and the water slowly seeps underneath the boards, obviously watering the seeds, and the seeds are going to need moisture in order to germinate. The other thing the boards do is that they hold those tiny seeds in place. If you have a rain, it does not have to be that heavy of a rain to make these little seeds start floating, and all of a sudden they're all displaced and your rows of carrots are no longer rows of carrots. So these nicely hold those little seeds in place. Carrots are a cool season crop. So if it is really hot, like mid-August, early September, like it is here, still quite hot, it helps cool the soil down by shading the soil. And I'm going to come out here actually with my thermopen. I did that last season, and I checked the temperature of the soil underneath the board versus outside of the boards, and there was a 10-degree soil difference. And if you're planting in the spring when it's cold, you'll find that the boards actually help insulate the soil a little bit. One more thing that I should mention is that this is a personal preference and it's totally up to you, but we always use untreated wood in our garden beds because we're just doing the best we can to avoid chemicals. And if you buy treated wood, there's always that chance that the chemicals can leach into your soil and then into your seeds and into your food, and you definitely do not want that to happen. Check out this huge worm. Now you know you have healthy soil when you see huge worms like this when you're pulling carrots out. No matter how you plant your seeds to achieve good germination, focusing on healthy soil by adding compost, planting cover crops, mulching, and doing a soil test can all make a difference. If it's too late in the season to plant carrots for a fall and winter harvest in your growing zone, they can be planted in the spring, a few weeks before your last frost date, for an early summer harvest. If possible to plan ahead for next year, we'd highly recommend a fall and winter harvest because the carrots are so sweet and delicious. Thank you for watching. Wherever you are in your gardening journey, I hope you enjoyed this video and hope you'll join me again in the garden. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons.